What?
Hey everybody, I'm Mike Levy and welcome back to another Value Bike Field Trip Review. This time around, we're talking about Norco's Fluid HT1 Hardtail, a bike that Norco is saying is a progressive hardtail that's ready for all sorts of single track adventures. All right, let's talk about the frame next, and this is gonna be pretty quick because there's not a whole lot to cover. You can get this bike in either 27.5 or 29-inch flavors depending on the frame size that you need. Extra small to mediums, well, those get the small wheel sizes, but medium to extra large, you could have those with 29-inch wheels, just like our test bike. All right, let's go over some frame details now, and starting at the back of the bike, boost through axle spacing, of course. There's not much in the way of chainstay protection, so you'll need to add something there to keep the noise down. There's a threaded bottom bracket, that's always nice to see. Cables go inside the frame, including the one for the dropper post, and one of the two colors you could pick from is this black sparkle paint job that I'm a big fan of. Now we're going to talk about some geometry numbers next, and Norco bills this thing as being progressive, but I'm not overly convinced. The front end sits at 66.5 degrees, so we've got some slacker bikes here than that, where the C-tube angle is 74.5 degrees, and both of those numbers are with the 120mm travel X-Fusion fork that comes stock on the HT1. There's a huge spread for the reach as well. The extra small sizes, well, they come with a 380mm reach, so they can fit some pretty short people. Extra large is all the way out to 500mm, and our medium-sized test bike is 440. Moving on to the back end, all sizes, no matter what the wheel size, come with a 430mm chainstay length. So if you're thinking about a Fluid HT for yourself, you've only got two bikes to pick from. The fanciest option is this one here. This is the $1,500 HT1, and it comes with a 12-speed Shimano drivetrain, that 120mm travel X-Fusion fork with a lockout and rebound adjust, and also a dropper post. Now, if you don't have quite that much money to spend, for $1,200, you could pick yourself up a Fluid HT2. That gets you a Sentier fork, also with 120mm of travel, and an 11-speed drivetrain instead of this bike's 12-speed drivetrain, and you still get a dropper post. All right, that's enough for the details. Let's talk about how the Fluid rides out on the trails.
Being a hardtail, obviously it was pretty straightforward. There's no rear suspension is set up. As for the fork, there's a recommended air pressure chart on the back of one of the fork legs, and I pumped it up to the air pressure recommended for my weight, and that turned out to be pretty much bang on. I will say I did have some trouble getting the rebound where I wanted it. There's a bunch of turns of the rebound adjuster, and the first 90% of them seem to do nothing, and then the last turn seemed to do all the things. So I was kind of bouncing back and forth between, it's a little too slow to boing, boing, boing. But in the end, I did get it somewhere where I liked it. So yeah, and then the tires, of course, 21 and 23 PSI, and we hit the trails.
Let's get into how this thing climbs. What's the story there?
So the bike that I'm going to compare it to is actually the Rocky Mountain Growler. And the reason that I'm doing that is that it is quite a bit different. And it really illustrates just how different these two bikes are, even though they kind of look like they could be used for the same thing.
They're all hardtails, right?
They're all
How different
hardtails,
can they be?
right? Turns out very different. Norco says if you go to their website and you read about the Fluid, they describe it as having progressive geometry. Well, I might disagree with that. I mean, it's not all that progressive. But on the trail, what it does is definitely light a fire under your ass more than the Growler. It's a little bit more traditional positioning where the Growler is a little bit more upright and the front wheel is farther out. It's a slacker bike. Whereas on the Fluid with the 120mm fork, that's another difference. So the Growler is 140, the front of the Fluid is 120. And I mean, that changes the character of the bike completely. So while Norco bills this thing as a progressive hardtail, to me, it felt more like a capable cross-country hardtail, if I'm completely honest. And part of that is that, yeah, it likes to be pedaled hard and it felt real good in the twisty tight stuff. I feel like if I was faced with a long, huge day in the saddle and, I don't know, 10,000 feet of climbing, you know what bike I'm picking? I'm definitely picking the Fluid before the Growler. So those are my thoughts, Sarah, but I know you spent a bunch of time on this bike as well. And what did you think about it on the climbs?
Yeah, I definitely thought it was obviously it's an efficient climber. It really felt, I was surprised.
Not much pedal bob?
Not a lot of pedal bob.
Very neat.
But I was surprised.
How do they do that?
I was surprised how I was able to still make it up climbs that I thought I was going to be spinning out on. Like I was sure that like on a bike that with numbers like that, no rear suspension, that I was going to just be like spinning out everywhere, not being able to make it over some routes, and it wasn't that case. Like
maybe it's because of those grippy Ardent tires.
Ooh, I don't know.
We'll talk about that later.
But yeah, regardless, I was pretty impressed with the way that this bike climbed.
Yeah, definitely, I would agree with that.
More capable than a bike like the Growler on the climbs, maybe? But what about the descents? What's the story there?
Well, I mean, it's definitely not gonna match the Growler on the descents. So one of our test trails was pretty fast. It's full of rocks and roots, relatively high speed. And in that sort of setting, the Norco feels quite nervous compared to the Growler. Obviously there's 20 millimeters less travel, and obviously the bike is a bit steeper, and you can definitely feel that on the trail. It's a little bit closer to the edge when you're at speed or at your own personal limits. Yeah, it just feels like the edge is closer in those moments. So what did you think?
Yeah, it's definitely a bike that you have to be a lot more precise about the lines that you're choosing on. You're not just going to be kind of sending it into some rough rocks. You're kind of picking your way around them. If you ride smoother trails, it's probably a better choice.
Yeah, that's to me is the big strength of the Norco. It still feels capable on the descents, but it really loves those fast, smooth trails, places where you can pump and find speed and backsides. That's the kind of place where the Growler is it's more of a monster truck, definitely. You could definitely go through the things more, and it's a different kind of bike. So while we're going on and on about how the Fluid Hardtail can't keep up to the Growler, it is not your traditional cross-country bike. Let's get that straight. This is something that's still quite capable, especially in the right hands. Part of that actually comes down to that X-Fusion fork. We talked about it a little bit in the setup before. I struggled to find a rebound setting that I wanted. But once I got it set up, I really liked how that fork works there. 120 millimeters, and it didn't really leave me asking for anything more, to be honest. Let's start with the good stuff, Sarah. Tell me what you liked.
Yeah, definitely that X-Fusion fork.
Right?
Might not have had all the adjustments, but it worked well for its intended use. And then that drivetrain, nothing to complain about there.
Right.
Works really well under pressure.
Yeah, big 11 to 51 tooth spread on that cassette, and that really helps, especially if you're a new rider. It's gonna get you to the top of the hill without too much hassle.
Let's talk about some of the less exciting things, the lowlights of the components here on this bike.
Yeah, there are two things that stand out to me, and the biggest one are the Tektro brakes, which are called, there's a lot of numbers, which are called HDM275 brakes. Catchy name. They're 2-piston brakes, and they probably will work just fine if they didn't come with those resin pads and the rotors that you need for those things. These are probably the most disappointing brakes of our value test bikes, of all 10 of them. They never seemed to break in. There was never any real initial bite and not a whole lot of power at all. So bare minimum, if you're thinking about this bike, you're gonna need to change the brake pads and the rotors, and maybe more. The other thing, it comes with a 750 millimeter wide handlebar, and there was a time that was plenty wide. I mean, there was a time when that was huge, right? But if you're billing your bike as a progressive hardtail like Norco is, it can't come with a 750 millimeter wide handlebar. Just put a cheap 800 millimeter wide aluminum handlebar on there, and if the people don't like it, they can cut it. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, 750 is pretty narrow for an aggressive.
It's my wide shoulders.
Yeah.
I need those 900 millimeter handlebars, Norco, not the 750s. I have to turn sideways to the door. So those are the two things, and obviously the brakes is the big one. That could cost you some money down the road. The handlebar, that's an easier thing to solve. If the only equation that you want to hear about is value versus capability, well, the Norco, it does not compare as favorably as that Rocky Mountain Growler. It's nearly the same price, but it's definitely going to require some brake upgrades of some sort for you to get the most out of this bike. And I mean, that could be a few $100 or more depending on the brakes that you want. Okay, it's time to talk pros and cons. Sarah, you and I are pretty positive. Let's start with the good stuff first.
So we've compared it to the Rocky Mountain Growler a whole lot, saying that bike is more capable, but if we're comparing the Fluid to some more traditional hardtails, this is a lot more capable bike. And so for the right rider, they're gonna be loving this bike on fun, fast, flowy trails.
Okay, moving on to the cons, the stuff that we didn't like. Norco bills this thing as being a progressive hardtail, and yeah, I mean, if you have a 4 or 5-year-old hardtail in your garage, this thing is way more capable than that, but it is not the bike to buy if you want to ride a hardtail down all the gnarly things. Definitely not. The other things that we need to mention, again, that narrow handlebar and those brakes that were a huge letdown.
All right, Levy, it's time to wrap it up. Who's this bike for?
Yeah, I think the Fluid HT1 is gonna be a great option for somebody who wants a hardtail and definitely wants to get out there and ride all the things, but doesn't need a bike that's gonna be extremely capable because they're gonna be pointing them stuff down super gnarly stuff. This isn't that bike. If your terrain is fast and fun and flowy and smooth and you wanna cover a lot of ground, but you want something with more modern geometry, this is the bike. All right, that's it for the Norco Fluid HT1. Stay tuned for more videos and remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them.